Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Timko, and this is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, developed by Ninja Theory. Out of the shackles of AAA publishers, they have gone indie and are trying to make what they call a AAA indie game, which, yes, that sounds pretentious as hell, but at $30 or your regional equivalent, delivering the level of quality they are definitely delivering with this title, I'm not gonna call them out on that too much. This is definitely in the neighborhood of what you can expect from a AAA developer, and that for much less of a price tag. Now, Ninja Theory are the makers of games like Heavenly Sword and Enslaved and DMC Devil May Cry, and this game follows a bit of the same trend as those games in terms of action combat, but holy hell does it have a whole nother take on every other aspect. The game delves into a variety of things such as schizophrenia for the main character. You're playing as a fourth-person view behind the character in a sort of fashion, and there are some very interesting narrative themes being thrown around. Before we dive into all the good bits about the game and some of the annoyances the game has, we're going to take a look at the options menu and talk about PC performance because there are a couple of minor concerns to be had here. As always, if you are not inclined to join us for this segment, there are links taking you to proper timestamps in the description below. Options-wise, the options menu isn't really that interesting overall. Graphical options do have resolution support for most common resolutions, has a display mode for full screen windowed and full screen windowed, but it ignores your default resolution set when you switch to windowed, a bit of an annoyance. Quality presets, pretty straightforward, and then you have a bunch of advanced options such as post-processing shadows, textures, and the like. The game does have motion blur, and that is not toggleable, which is annoying to all hell, and the game mostly just doesn't explain itself very well. There's some AA included, but again, no option for this. Not really that spectacular. There's also no option for FOV, which, while I normally don't mind, I would have liked a little bit in this game because it does tend to get a little claustrophobic. Now, part of that is the game's design, part of that is just not as good for the eyes, so if you have motion sickness, do keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, it's atmospherically very well put together, so that tight field of view, even in the third person over the shoulder mode, isn't that out of character. A gamma setting, which is exactly what you expect it to be. Controls that are rebindable, as you'd expect. There aren't a lot of controls in this game, most of it is done through regular movement, as well as a couple of combat controls. Nothing really special or unique, and also nothing really outstanding in any particular way. It's rebindable keys. What else could you want? Audio levels are master, as well as 4 volume levels for music, SFX, voices, and menus, as well as subtitles. I would strongly suggest playing this game with headphones. In fact, I would suggest not touching the game without headphones, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But the game's music and these sliders accompanying that music as options are very important, so I do strongly suggest you go into the game and play around with these sliders to get them to your comfortable levels, because audio, voice acting, and overall voice delivery is very important in this game. In fact, it is probably the single most important part of this game's experience. And lastly, subtitles, which you can keep off if you want or turn on as you like. They're not going to help you too much because of the way audio works, with multi-layered audio levels overlapping one over the other. It's a pretty hectic, claustrophobic, and, well, schizophrenic experience, and that's exactly what the game aims for, so they did a good job there. Then there is combat difficulty. I have it on auto, so it scales up and down based on how well you're playing mostly. And then you have photo mode, which is exactly what it says. You turn this on with the press of a hotkey button. You are able to set up a screenshot to your specific desire. That really is the options menu. Nothing too strange, nothing too unique or out of the ordinary. There's nothing like colorblind mode or other specific accessibility options or anything of the sort. And as I said, the graphical options do leave a little bit to be desired. Performance-wise, the game runs pretty well. There's no real issues here or there overall, but the game doesn't run at a stable 60 at all times. There are a couple of areas where it does dip below 60 for no particular reason. The game is going to be stable 60, and suddenly you turn a corner and bam, it's 40 for a second and a half, and then back up to 60, which indicates something like loading problems. But again, it's not consistent and it's not an overall issue. Those dips do make a little bit of a mar on the game, but as the developer saying, it's a AAA indie. At $30, we do give them a little bit of slack. So before I give you the full rundown on everything about the game, it is very important to understand why the narrative and vocal direction this game is going in is so damn impressive and important. So before I begin my further critique of the gameplay, here is about a minute of cutscene with some of the best examples I could find that did not contain many spoilers about what you can expect during the entire game in terms of audio.
The hardest battles are fought in the mind. That is what Dillian taught her. With every defeat, the dark rot will grow and soon it will take her soul. But for now, at least, she still has control of her mind. And she will fulfill her vow, whatever the cost.
Listen to me, Senua. The goddess Hela lies behind the gate to Helheim. To open the gate, you must first face the gods that guard it. The god of fire, Surt, and the god of illusion, Valravan. Spill their blood to open the gate to Helheim and enter the land of the dead.
Diving into gameplay, there are three main components we need to talk about when you look at Hellblade. The first is obviously the very heavy narrative experience, and we'll start there as well because that is going to be the make or break depending on your preference in gameplay and game style. In fact, the game is so narratively heavy and it's very linear that the first opening scene where the game introduces you to the character and all the notions that she hears all these voices and these ghosts and these spirits from all sides takes a good solid 5 minutes. That's a 5-minute cutscene before the game even begins. And that does set the tone for how the game handles a variety of cutscenes and various other things that occur throughout the title. You will frequently lose control and just have to sit back and sort of relax and look at the wonderful little picture and the fantastic narrative being drawn for you. If that is absolutely not your thing, then this game is not going to be for you. It's a linear, story-driven action-adventure game, and it's an emphasis on story-driven. There's a lot of story here. But the narrative doesn't start and end at the dialogue only. The narrative goes beyond the cutscenes, much beyond that in fact. As I said, Senua hears voices, and these voices aren't your typical little whispers from your dead mother, though obviously that comes into play as well. She battles through her demons, she battles apparently through the demons of others, through sacrifices, through killing, through murder, through history, through blood, pain, fire, and quite literal insanity. And she experienced these things as visions around her. These voices are going to come from multiple sides at the same time, giving you conflicting information, but they are also the only way to get clues for what's going on in the game world. So the dialogue and narrative of this title goes far beyond just showcasing the story, just sort of storytelling. There's part of that for sure, and it's a very integral and important part to the game. But beyond that, the dialogue delivered, especially during combat, is the only indication you might have that somebody's behind you about to stab you in the ass. Because these voices will tell you in a whisper, "Be careful, behind you." Sort of like a Zelda-like Navi going behind you saying, "Hey, listen," only about a million times less annoying and much creepier. In Hellblade, the dialogue and options are done to such a fantastic degree, and the game even says so, that you should probably play them with headphones. Now the reason for that is that they use a method of layering audio by using multiple microphones that creates a very cool 3D effect. By using voices in this manner, they can position audio from all types of levels and sizes, including voices and variety of surrounding sounds, be they fire sounds, be they combat sounds, or be they anything else really, in a 3D sphere around you. By exactly doing that, having two microphones, one for your left ear, one for your right ear, and by repositioning these microphones based on length and sound levels, they create a very interesting and cool 3D audio experience, as if you're standing in a room and things are vibrating or echoing around you. A truly fantastic experience, and well worth getting the headphones out, putting them on, and immersing yourself in this story. It does increase the creep and horror factor of this title about tenfold, so if you are not into that, well, that's a way to avoid it, though I would not recommend doing so. Pick up your headphones and listen to the fantastic dialogue as well as the overall voice acting. And the voice acting quality is stellar across the board, and that is a very important note to make. This game is very high on quality, but there are a couple of minor issues, especially during some of the conversations and some of the moments you notice the game. You can hear a slight little clipping here and there about voices that are just cut off a tad too soon, or moments when you transition between one story expose and another because you may be running through an area and the voice will just fade out and cut off in the middle of a sentence that might actually be important in favor for some flavor text that just comes rolling in at that exact moment. So the prioritization is generally good, but there are a couple of moments here and there where I've caught myself listening to something that was suddenly cut off due to something else that did not feel, and it doesn't appear to be, quite as important as that which I was listening to initially. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. A couple of minor gripes here and there is nothing to be too concerned about. The dialogue itself also is the method you interact with the world. When you miss a puzzle, or you miss a certain clue, or something happens around the game as you're moving around, the game's voices, the various things of expose, either being thrown at the main character or by this narrative character floating around and narrating the experience for you as you play the game, does provide you all the clues you need to solve puzzles, figure out various combat tactics, and even consider timings for various boss fights. In a very memorable boss fight, a certain enemy will do a charge attack at you, and the first time that happens, the voices scream that you should definitely dodge right there. If you trust these voices, you will dodge the attack. If you don't, you'll probably get smacked in the face a couple dozen times. And this is a repeating occurrence. The voice will tell you when you are moving in the wrong direction or when you have a wrong puzzle, but they never tell you that directly. You never get told, hey, listen, go left here. But these various different voices at the same time will give you conflicting information. Go there. No, don't go there. It's dangerous. Open the door. No, don't open the door. Careful, there's a pit there. What are you doing? Just jump right on. All these different bits of conflicting information and intonations on different levels is something that the game does through a tremendously fantastic level. I have no real complaints in this regard at all. The game's level of quality in this is absolutely phenomenal, and it also transferred the combat experience, as well as the various world exploration and puzzle moments. As I mentioned, outside of the dialogue, combat and puzzles are the two big other aspects of the game, but that is not all. As you progress through the world, each segment of the game is sort of linearly structured to provide the next segment of a story. Initially, you get told you have to kill 2 god beings, and as you progress to either one of their domains, you have to solve a couple of trials and a couple of puzzles to get to the big boss fight to unlock the next segment. Pretty straightforward. These puzzles are obviously themed to one or the other boss, and that is pretty much as you'd expect it to be. But each of these zones also has a variety of runic stones that sort of tell you the mythos and mythology of the game world, mostly based around Nordic mythology. Interesting segment here is that as the game progresses, you unlock more of these runes, and if you miss 1 or 2, the game will inform you that hey, on this amazing little graphic, you see that these red ones are the ones you missed, and the blue ones are the ones you got. Maybe turn back a couple of steps and find that one you missed. It may have some interesting information. Not only might it have interesting information about the backstory and world building, it will have very important information to understand the character and what is going on with the story. They're not just backstory. And this attention to detail gets seen throughout the entire game, be it in audio delivery in terms of voice acting, be it in visual quality, through storytelling, and even be it in art style and art direction overall, from character model to character movement. Every segment of this game is designed around a core singular concept of delivering an experience, and that experience has been fine-tuned to a T. Yes, it's linear, yes, it's very guided, yes, it's very narrative heavy, but it is also very, very good. Now, the part that isn't narrative heavy is the puzzles and combat. Puzzles are a bit of a mixed bag, and this is my biggest gripe with the game in general. Some of the early puzzles are quite obtuse, and even with the voices telling you bits of information here and there, it is still a massive annoyance to stand exactly in the right spot, to aim exactly in the right direction for this little rune puzzle that comes up on your screen to be solved without you going absolutely insane. There were a couple of times where I actually had to backtrack to make sure I wasn't losing my mind or I didn't miss anything because I couldn't figure out how to solve a very particular puzzle. And it's not because I couldn't figure out the solution was right in front of me. The problem was that I only stood one step to decide on where the game deemed I should be. A little bit more leeway in these puzzles would have been a nice addition and just made my headache somewhat less, especially considering I had about 15 different voices telling me how stupid I was for not figuring out that puzzle inside of my eardrums. As the game progresses though, these puzzles become more involved, they become more complex, they become more interesting with different uses of illusions and things that might just be in Senua's head or things that might not even be in the real world, and you have to combine and balance all these various different notions that the game throws at you repeatedly and expandfully as the game progresses. So initially it does start you with a very limited set of optionals in terms of how to solve puzzles and even in terms of combat interaction and even the narrative experience. But as the game progresses, these segments become more involved, more in-depth and much more interesting. The game truly does grow on you and it gets its own footing about an hour and a half in and really starts rolling in from there. Every time I thought that the game had me by the coattails and didn't let go, about an hour in, and then I had the same notion about 2 hours in, and then again 3 hours in, kept pulling me in deeper and deeper and did not let go. Every step of the way was more intriguing, more interesting and more enjoyable. Again, streamlined, story-based narrative experience is enjoyable to me, but if you don't enjoy that sort of gameplay, if you want something like Shadow Mordor or something more open world where you can explore and do whatever you want, this is not that game. The maps aren't designed and the segments and zones aren't designed for free exploration. They are very linear with a specific goal in mind. A room is made for combat, another room is there to solve a puzzle, a third room is there to be an expose for a piece of narrative, a certain segment and a pathway is there to showcase the world, or showcase a certain idea or notion, or just as a corridor between two places to create some expose and give you a little bit of breathing room between different sets of dialogue. But nothing in the game is just designed to be there. There's nothing being thrown out of the way just to fill space. That doesn't happen. And that is a very interesting notion, especially when you take in consideration the fact that a lot of this game is designed around you solving these puzzles and progressing into the combat and further narrative experience. Which means that every step of the way, you're challenged in a different way. Puzzles obviously are a little bit frustrating. Some of these room puzzles are just plain annoying. Later down the line, the illusion puzzles and the psychedelic levels of puzzle are very interesting. And much later down the line, you have a couple of different types of puzzles, which I'll not spoil, that again intrigue and are very interesting, but still are quite frustrating if, like me, you don't really enjoy puzzles and would prefer the game to get on ahead with the dialogue, narrative and combat experience. And talking about that combat, as I mentioned earlier, part of the game has a very tight field of view. It is a over-the-shoulder camera, but it is very focused behind the main character, and combat does feel very claustrophobic because of it. And this isn't a bad thing when you have one enemy in front of you. You're this smallish woman that isn't tall, isn't muscular, but does move in a very convincing, very cool, strong fashion. Every attack, every move, every dodge, every roll is fast, is supple, and just feels very powerful. And yet, you're facing these goat creatures and these guys with massive maces and big shields that, well, are 2, 3, 4 times your size. And when they smack down their axes and swords and hammers, you do want to get out of the way, and you feel that as well. So every encounter, regardless of how the game presents the combat difficulty, even if you put it to easy, always feels overwhelming, even if you're only facing one enemy. And if you're facing 2 or 3 enemies at the same time, at that point, combat becomes quite hectic, because you have to balance between these 3 enemies, and any one of them hitting you 2 or 3 times just means you're dead. You can't take a lot, you're unarmored, and they're 4 times your size with a massive axe. You can't really deal with that. But at the same time, dodging, moving left and right, pushing in quick attacks, even kicking them in the face with a melee attack, smacking him in the back of the head with a heavy attack as you dodge around their slow, lumbering, hulking attacks. Every step of the way, combat feels intense, enjoyable, and very visceral. When you smash an enemy in the face with your sword with a big heavy overhand attack, it feels like that attack registers. You are smashing into their head. They'll notice, they'll stagger back, they'll sort of be dazed a little bit when they choreograph an attack and you dodge to the side. It's not that you're dodging several feet to the side and sort of flying away in a magical rainbow. No, you're barely dodging because these are heavy attacks. You just sort of move to the side and position yourself in a place where you could counterattack. From a combat experience, the game makes up in spades and then surpasses it completely all the annoyance I had with the puzzle segments. Every time I came across a puzzle where I felt annoyed or couldn't solve it because of some asinine position I had to stand in just to get his view exactly right for that room to line up, I remind myself that right after is going to be a intense, fantastic little bit of combat. And it isn't even combat with a big boss at the end of it. Even a random creature spawning in just to kill you for time's pleasure is still very intense. And that makes this game's combat so damn interesting. Coupled with unique bosses that have their own sets of mechanics, introduce new ideas to the game, is also very good. I felt the same intensity and the same rush I had when I was playing Dark Souls while facing these bosses. And this is due to the very fast, visceral nature of the combat system. When you jump in and get that quick attack off just before the enemy boss does something unique, like charging you or smacking you from the side or teleporting away, it feels very good. When they block your attack and you just get out of the way of their counterattack, that feels very good. When they smack you in the face and Senua falls to the ground on her knees and you're smashing that dodge button hoping you'll recover from your stagger on time, that is very intense, and the game excels in that regard nearly every single time there is a combat encounter. There are a couple of minor annoyances here though, especially in the camera department. As I said, the camera is very tight behind the shoulders, and this creates the very heavy level of tension, the very intense feeling of being overwhelmed and overpowered by these big, massive, hulking enemies. But when you're fighting in tight enclosed spaces, or you're fighting in an area with maybe wood on the side or trees or big shrubbery around, it can happen that the camera is going to pan around behind those, making it impossible to see. This happens more than one occasion. Or if you're facing a wall and enemy is you backed up against it, it'll zoom in further, making it basically impossible to see the enemy choreographing their attacks, and thus impossible to time and plan your dodges or counterattacks. This is a minor gripe that doesn't happen all too often, but when it does happen, it is immensely frustrating. So, to bring it all together, Hellblade combines an intense linear narrative experience with amazing cutscenes, fantastic voice acting, and a way of telling a story that I have not yet seen in AAA games at all. This sort of schizophrenic experience with spirits plaguing you from every side, coupled with the intense audio delivery system that creates a unique 3D surround audio method, is phenomenal, and the game will and should get every bit of praise in existence for this system. The game could be called very linear, the game could be called very short at 8 to 10 hours, but regardless of that, the implementation of the system and the implementation of the dialogue as well as the overall quality of it is phenomenal. Secondly, the combat experience also ties into this narrative experience, these voices, these hints you get from these spirits or delusions, if you would, whatever they might be. As the story will progress, that becomes more apparent which and what they are, but initially you have no idea, and the game does an excellent job of portraying that. So when you hear a voice telling you, "Careful, they're on your left," you don't trust that voice. Maybe they're behind me. Maybe I'm deluding myself as a character that this is the case. All the same, while you're fighting or doing something, these voices might tell you, "Oh, look, they're too big for you. They'll take you down." And other voices might yell out and say, "No, you can have them, while you're only one hit away from death. Because as these voices are clamoring for your attention, there is this big, hulking, massive creature in front of you with a big goat head and a massive axe and sword trying to cleave you in little itty bits. And that is a very cool experience. Combat on top, very smooth, very intense, very visceral combat that does not fail to deliver a unique and amazing experience. So far, 2 for 2. Then we get to the puzzles, and that's where the game does lose a couple of points from my end. I'm never a great fan of puzzles. I can't really stand them in Tomb Raider, and I really don't enjoy them in other games. It is not something I enjoy. Nonetheless, some of the puzzles in this game, because the way they tie into the narrative experience, are very interesting. Especially some of the illusion puzzles, and some of the delusion puzzles, and some of the ideas and narrative experiences that are tied into these puzzles are very cool. And because the way the puzzles are structured, they do provide a good set of engaging, interesting gameplay that also progresses the story further. But there are also the puzzles where you have to line up runes and sort of figure out how to stand in that exact spot and point your camera in that exact direction to get this door to open up. And those puzzles might as well be removed from the game for all I care. They are not fun, they are not enjoyable, they grind the progression down to a halt, and they pull you completely out of the experience, because when you're running around the same little segment of the map for the 6th time trying to figure out where you should point your camera, it sort of loses its appeal quite immensely. the game isn't without its problems. As I mentioned, there is a couple of dips in FPS here and there, and as I mentioned, there are some of the camera issues the game encounters as well. And some critics have encountered a couple of issues here and there with there being bugs or visual glitches happening. I haven't encountered any of those myself, so I can't really comment on them, but do keep in mind that for $30, this game is delivering a whole lot of quality and content that should not be underestimated, with a couple of issues here and there. I don't want to shove those issues under the rug though. They are definitely here, because I would still recommend checking it out. And at $30 or your regional equivalent, there's no real reason not to. This game stands up and equals up with some of the best AAA experience we've had in the last couple of years. It does so for a lot shorter, 8 to 10 hours, and it does so with a much more linear and focused experience for sure. But where it delivers exceedingly well, and what it tries to deliver, it does with great precision, skill, and quality. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is available over on Steam and various other online retailers, and if you're interested in checking this game out, which I strongly suggest you do if you have any mediocre of interest in action-adventure games, there's a link in the description below for exactly that purpose. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, do press that like button, and if you want to see more content like this on the channel, press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. And if you want to support GuyLogicGaming as we continue to deliver you ad-free content forever, do check out our Patreon down below. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.